Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday night Bible study. Tonight is part four, I think, part four
I
of
think
our
so
One
too.
Nation Under God series that we've been doing this month. Um, I I say this, I think I've said this for every single one of these episodes, but I'm incredibly excited for tonight. This is the series I look forward to every year now. I enjoy this series so much. I get to talk about two of the three things that I will talk about nonstop, and that's God and the history of the United States. So it's wonderful for me. But tonight is very special. For one reason, because we have Alexandra Compere on with us tonight. So very special guest we have tonight. Um, and so tonight we're going to talk about the legal system in the United States. So our title for tonight is the law of the land, and we're kind of looking at the foundation and kind of sort of where we have strayed from the foundation in our legal system. But before we do anything else, we're going to go to the Lord. So let's go ahead and pray. And Father, Lord, we thank you. We praise you. Thank you for this night. Lord, I just pray that you would be with us where every person that's on here tonight, wherever they are, Lord. I pray that you would fill us with your Holy Spirit tonight, Lord. I pray that you would seal our lips from saying anything that doesn't need to be said, but every word that we say comes directly from you. Lord, I pray that you would be with us tonight. I thank you for the blessing of being able to come on here, Lord, on this platform and to talk about you, to talk about your plans for this country and all that you have done for this country. Lord, I thank you so much for what you have in store for us tonight. I pray that we would glorify you and honor you in all that we do. Lord, again, I just thank you and praise you in Jesus' most holy name. Amen. So tonight, like I said, we're going to talk about the legal system in the United States. Um, this is kind of a maybe somewhat of a controversial topic, but there's a huge debate that has gone on for probably over 100 years now about whether or not the United States was founded on biblical principles or not. We know it was. Um, so in kind of the spirit of that debate that has gone on tonight, we're going to look at how the Bible influenced not only our founding fathers, but how it influenced the laws and the foundation upon which we were built. Um, I think most people will kind of agree that the two most influential documents that we have in this nation's history is the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And if you look at how those were written and who wrote them and their intentionality behind writing those, you can see the role that biblical principle um, for the Constitution, specifically the Old Testament, and then Jesus' teachings in the New Testament, how those influenced those documents. Um, and so, kind of after looking at education last week, it seemed like a natural progression to go into the legal system tonight. Um, and so, before we kind of go a whole lot further, I'm going to let Alexandra, if you have anything you want to kick us off with anything, I'm going to open it up to you.
Oh, well, um, first and foremost, I have to say thank you so much for everything that you all do to keep this ministry going. You guys are an integral part of the Morning Star infrastructure, and every week, day in and day out, you're preparing, but every week you show up and you give our online community what they wouldn't get anywhere else. I have the utmost confidence in what you guys bring to the table. Always fireworks with this group because I mean, as we do in the building, we peel back the layers and we have the tough conversations. But I see you guys doing that with faithfulness and diligence. And I would be remiss not to at least tell you that, brother, you're doing a great job leading this ministry, and thank you for that, and also to everyone who helps you move that mission forward. And so it is a great honor for me to be here. It's been quite a while.
Yeah,
I
it has
this
been.
this Bible study, brother, you'll know this is very near and dear to my heart. So I'm so grateful that again, that I get to be a part of it tonight, but that you guys are carrying that mission forward. And so when we talk about the American legal system, it's not lost on me that you would invite me to have a conversation about this, because I spent the better part of my life preparing to enter into the legal system in a professional capacity, and it has been it has been a whirlwind, from everything from what culture inculcates us with about the legal system, to what my formal legal training taught me, and then the real deal, what I see in practice every day. And um, I'll let you set the stage for these conversations, but I can tell you that those three facets of my life have been incongruent. I know what I heard growing up and how I had an idea of what the legal system was. It changed drastically when I went to grad school and learned the legal system from that standpoint, to dive in and be a part of it, and then to see what the legal system looks like in practice as a licensed attorney. All None of those overlap um one to one. I mean, there's obviously going to be some ideas that are consistent, but I can tell you it is so different on this side of things than what it was when I first even thought I wanted to become an attorney.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you shared that the way that you did. So that's part of the reason for having you on here is you know more than especially myself. You have a unique look at the legal system, not just for your involvement in local politics and everything like that, but having gone through law school, having practiced law for a few years now. And so I'm very interested to see with some of these conversations that we're going to have what your take is, and kind of how you just put it out, that there are things that you knew beforehand going into it, and then kind of how maybe different information was presented as you went through law school and then practicing and everything like that. So I'm glad you said it that way, because that's kind of what I was I was thinking about already. Um, yeah. So then to kind of start off, well, I think one of the biggest things that we see today is, and it kind of goes to what we talked about last week, is in our education system today, we don't teach certain things the way that we used to. So you have a lot of people today, a large portion of the population has grown up not fully understanding their foundation, as a nation, where we started, where we came from, how we got to where we are, and and the people who were so responsible for that foundation that was laid. And with that, I think one of the biggest things that we see kind of stemming from that is we hear all kinds of arguments about the Constitution specifically. And then you realize that most people, or at least a lot of people, have never read the Constitution. And so there's an issue of people saying, well, the Constitution says this or it does this, and that's not at all what it says. It's not what it was created to do. That's not its role. And because you have so many people that don't understand that, kind of what we talked about last week, that if you don't know what your rights are, your rights can very easily be taken away from you because you don't understand what it is you have. And if you don't understand what the Constitution, what its purpose is, then how can we understand when things from the Constitution are being violated, or things are being done that aren't in line with what the intent of the Constitution was? And so I think, kind of in looking at that, I want to take just a second and kind of look at what the Constitution was for. It established it was to establish the fundamental framework of our system of government. It creates the supreme law of the land. It limits federal power, it defines citizens' rights, it divides authority between the national government and the states. And so we also see where it establishes our structure of government, which are three branches of government: legislative, executive, and the judicial, to balance power, prevent tyranny, all those kind of things. Um, One of the most important things to me with the Constitution is the fact that, and I think this is something that has been lost over the course of history, is it's not about our interpretation of the Constitution. It's what was the intent behind the Constitution. And when you look at how the Supreme Court was originally supposed to rule on things, on whether they were constitutional or not, it wasn't about their interpretation. Because what we see in more recent history is politics and ideology come into play when it was not supposed to come into play. That it's about what the men who sat down, ratified, wrote out the Constitution. It was what their intent was behind this document, not your interpretation of it and then how it could be twisted to fit this ideology or another. And we see that. I think the biggest area that we see that, or one of them, is with the First Amendment. The First Amendment talks about, that Congress has no right to establish a religion, basically to institute a national religion that all would follow. But it also can't prevent the free exercise of religion. And in that becomes kind of a back and forth that we see now today of where the limits are within the Constitution within that. And what the Constitution is to do is to set up what our federal government can and cannot do. And so, yes, we understand that the federal government cannot create a religion that we are all to follow, like we saw that England had. And that's why we had, the Puritans and the separatists who broke free from the Church of England and came to the North America at the time. It wasn't the United States at that time, but they came here to have religious freedom, to worship Christ according to the way they felt the Bible told them to worship the Lord. But what we see later on too is when each individual state established their own constitutions, you do see a state. It usually was a state denomination. I don't want to say state religion, because most of all of the colonies in their constitution asserted that Christianity was the religion of the country. And in those state constitutions, there was a requirement of, if you were going to hold office in that state, you had to profess a faith in the Lord. You had to agree that the Bible was true. And so you had to make a profession of faith in order to serve in office. And so that's where I think there's kind of a line between what the Constitution does, and the Constitution is for the federal government. It does not necessarily dictate what the states can and cannot do in certain instances. And Alexandra, I didn't realize I was going to be so nervous talking about this stuff with you on here. And so if I'm wrong at any point, you make sure you tell me I'm wrong. Yeah, this is like preaching in front of your dad. It's terrifying, kind of.
No, you're doing a great job.
Okay. So
just know you're so loved.
Yeah.
It's all good.
And so, one of the things that I really wanted to focus on tonight is where do we see that the Bible was our foundation for our law? Well, one of the things that I think we see is that the Ten Commandments were very prominently placed within our very many government buildings. It was commonplace throughout the United States that when we were first established, even into the first 100 years or so of the country. One of the things that I don't think people recognize that comes directly from the Ten Commandments, but one of the first things that we did was to hold the Sabbath in honor, that you were going to respect the Sabbath day. And so business wasn't conducted. You don't see the government doing stuff on Sunday. Today that may have more with them. It's a day they don't have to work, more so than honoring God. But that's just my take on that one. But there are things about oaths and perjury that all relate back to what we see. You're not to lie. You're not to bear false witness. You see our laws on governing marriage and divorce were heavily modeled on biblical teachings. Even our criminal law. again, going back to perjury, adultery, murder, theft, all of these things are directly influenced by what we see in the Ten Commandments and even the Mosaic Law. All of that kind of stems from biblical principles. So it shows that these men that were writing these things had an understanding of the Bible. One quote that really stuck out to me, in kind of putting this together. So Harry Truman, who was the 33rd president of the United States, he gave an address before an attorney general's conference on a law enforcement problem that we were having after the war. And his quote said, "The most important business in this nation, or any other nation for that matter, is raising and training children. If those children have the proper environment at home and educationally, very, very few of them ever turn out wrong. I don't think we put enough stress on the necessity of implanting in the child's mind the moral code under which we live." And then he goes on to say, "The fundamental basis of this nation's law was given to Moses on the Mount. The fundamental basis of our Bill of Rights comes from the teachings which we get from Exodus and Matthew, from Isaiah and St. Paul. I don't think we emphasize that enough these days. If we don't have the proper fundamental moral background, we will finally wind up with a totalitarian government which does not believe in rights for anybody except the state." I think that's kind of what we see we're headed to today. And to see a sitting U.S. president speak so emphatically that our law was based on the Bible, that was not lost on him. And we're not talking about something that happened 200 years ago. He said this in, oh, I thought I put down the date. I did not put down the date. I don't remember what the date was now. It was in the 40s, if I'm not mistaken. 40s or 50s that Truman said this. There was another man. He was a four-term governor of New York. He was a Democratic presidential candidate in 1928. He was Catholic. His name was Alfred Smith. He came under attack for running as a Catholic for president. In May of 1927, he said, "I am unable to understand how anything I was taught to believe as a Catholic could possibly be in conflict with what is good citizenship. So the essence of my faith is built upon the commandments of God. The law of the land is built upon the commandments of God. There can be no conflict between them." And that quote, not to go into a certain political discussion, but to see this man and the party with which he was affiliated and everything, to see him stand so strongly on his faith and his understanding of what our law was, that there was no conflict between those two things, that his faith in God and then having an understanding of what our legal foundation was, that there was not a conflict between the two. Another person that we see, John Adams, was very outspoken about, our Christian foundation and that us taking from the Bible what we would use to kind of make our law. John Adams was a very famous lawyer at the time. Just in case anybody doesn't know, John Adams is actually the lawyer that was responsible for defending the British soldiers in the Boston Massacre. Nobody else would defend them. And he stood up and said that, I will not have these men be killed just because right now that would be the most popular thing, because they opened fire on, colonial citizens, American citizens basically at that time. And the crowd wanted to hang them. All of Boston basically screamed to have these men hung or shot or worse. And John Adams refused to just stand by and let them not receive the proper legal defense that he felt they earned. And his argument actually ended up being that they were innocent, that they fired on the crowd because they were being pelted with snowballs, rocks, oyster shells, all kinds of stuff. And that's why they opened fire on the crowd. There's more to it than that, but that would take an hour to go through that conversation. So we won't do that tonight. But he even said, this quote it was in 1756, that he wrote this in his diary. And he said, "Suppose a nation in some distant region should take the Bible for their only law book, and every member should regulate his conduct by the precepts there exhibited. Every member would be obligated in conscience to temperance, frugality, and industry, to justice, kindness, and charity towards his fellow men. and to piety, love, and reverence toward Almighty God. What a utopia, what a paradise would this region be. So the men who were responsible for setting the foundation that this nation was built upon had an understanding of the Bible, and they believed that we should be built on biblical principles, and that's what was ingrained into the Constitution, into the Declaration of Independence, and into these documents that kind of set up our rule of law. Anybody have anything? I'll stop there.
Well, I don't mind jumping in because you touched on quite a few things.
Yeah.
So just to take, let's to go back to where you started, because you really did, you highlighted a lot of the frustrations I think that Christians have with the erosion of our Christian values in the public square. Um, if you go back to the very beginning, you were asking about how the Ten Commandments and the Lord's teachings, Jesus's teachings, informed our government. One of the things, specifically, not just our government, but our legal system is derived from Blackstone. Blackstone wrote common law. Common law, the tenets of common law are presumption of innocence, due process, jury of your own peers, um, justice is blind, ignorance is not a defense. I mean, you've got all of these major tenets of our legal system that derive directly from common law, written by Blackstone, who was a professing Bible believing Christian. He draws most, if not all, of his inspiration from Leviticus, from Deuteronomy, specifically Moses's farewell address to the children of Israel as he's about to enter into paradise and give them this form of government. We draw a lot of our framework, if not all of it, from exactly how Moses designed government as per the Lord's instruction. And so you've got, even I was looking at my notes, we see quite a bit, the erosion of common law. You were saying how the system has changed. That happened with the Supreme Court moving away from common law that outlines all these precepts to case law and this principle in jurisprudence called stare decisis, which means let the case stand or the precept stand. So basically, what happened is once there was a deviation from common law, any decision that was rendered that had similar facts or similar principles being drawn upon, they would defer to that case instead of deferring to common law precepts. And so you had this erosion over time because the standard had changed, because of this legal tool of deference to a former or a preceding law that the Supreme Court uh, in essence created by the stroke of a pen. Whatever their decision was in that case became precedent for things, matters that would come before them in the subsequent cases. And so it's really uh,
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Papa and I used to have these conversations all the time. Papa, Tom Croft, the former pastor of Morning Star, Papa picked my law school, and he and I would have conversations about Blackstone and common law being the standard, and he saw it over the course of his years how this just chipping away at our value sets and our standards had opened the door uh, for laws and decisions inconsistent with the principles that founded this nation.
No, so it's a perfect segue to where I was actually going to go next. So I'm glad you said that. It actually kind of makes what I was going to say, it makes it make more sense to me. And so, specifically when we're looking at First Amendment and Supreme Court decisions with that, we can point to a specific time where all of a sudden the way in which the Supreme Court ruled on these things changes. And I didn't know about that change and going away from common law into kind of, what had already been set as precedent. And so you see a shift in that. And I want to say it was the 1930s, 1940s, where um, and there's a Supreme Court case. It's Everson v. Board of Education, where you see an argument that funding was happening for people to go to Christian schools, but it wasn't being given to public schools. And so somebody argued, well, then the states should not be funding those Christian-based schools because of the separation of church and state, which we know is not an actual legitimate thing, anyways. But yeah, but then we start to see a shift in how they're ruled. And I'm kind of having a hard time now because my mind is literally blown a little bit. I did not know about that shift, and so that makes a lot of sense though that they would have, once that case established a precedent, then that's what is referred to, because after that moment you don't see them referring back to previous cases where the First Amendment was held, where there was no separation of church and state. And then after that moment, you're more likely to see them quote separation of church and state than they actually quote First Amendment in a lot of these cases, which is interesting to me that you would have legal arguments, you would have court cases going forth where the actual constitutional amendment is not being referred to, but it's an idea that was referred to in a letter from Jefferson to the Dansbury Baptists that has no legal precedent, that it has no legal standing. And that's interesting to me, because then that kind of shows where we start to see the shift in the Supreme Court and how they ruled on cases specifically, with the First Amendment.
Yeah, and if I did somebody else want to jump in? I didn't hear. But so
No,
one
we
of
are
the things,
fascinated. We are absolutely fascinated.
it's frustrating for sure, and fascinating, and also mind, like I appreciate all of those sentiments, because that was the unraveling that was happening in my life and in my own edification through grad school. Is I was born into a Christian family. My grandparents inundated me, and my parents inundated me with America's a Christian nation, and here are all of our founding documents. And to your point, brother, you were mentioning this before, the Declaration of Independence, as well as the Constitution, but specifically the Declaration of Independence, the last section reads as a prayer to Jesus Christ himself as the supreme judge. And so and then you were talking about the states. 10 of the 13 states made a specific call to profession of faith in their state constitutions. And we were only a collection of states at that point. So if you have the majority of them requiring a profession of faith and some form of membership to a local church, the understanding was not only clear, but it was accepted. So there wasn't a contention about whether this was an appropriate standard. Everybody seemed to be coming from the same baseline. And so what's interesting about, you were talking about, this isn't a remote concept of America being a Christian nation. What's ironic, and terribly devastating, is that 1954, President Eisenhower is the president. 1954, he is the president who adds "under God" to our Pledge of Allegiance. 1954. That was not that long ago. And
Yeah.
then the connection there is he is the same president who appointed the justices that led the charge to remove prayer from schools.
Yep.
So you've got this very, make that make sense. It does not, you have a very strange and demoralizing juxtaposition of a president who knew that there was nowhere else to look but to God.
Yep.
But then his appointees are stripping God's influence out of the education system, which you all were talking about last week. Very very strange, very frustrating, and yet those are the changes that have taken place. And um I mean, you're jumping both feet in. One of the things that is particularly frustrating on the Supreme Court piece of this is you're absolutely right in that the later in time cases reference a preceding case. They do not reference common law. And when you look at the landmark decision of the Dobbs case, that's the case that overturned Roe v. Wade and Casey Anthony. So the abortion case, our current law of the land concerning abortion, because the Supreme Court justices who wanted to uphold Roe, who wanted to uphold Casey versus Planned Parenthood of Pennsylvania, the justices who wanted to uphold it knew that they were in the minority. And so what their attorney did to advocate for the upholding of Roe v. Wade and Casey was to argue stare decisis. Hey, we've already been here before. We've already made a decision in Roe. We've already made a decision in Casey. We need to leave it alone because it's the practice of the judicial system to respect the decisions that have gone before it. It wasn't a legal argument as to why they needed to strike down this Mississippi law. It was not a. It was not. Oh, I don't want to misquote. Which state was it? Was it Mississippi? Oh yeah, it was. Okay. So yeah, the Dobbs case, you don't have an attorney arguing that the premise of this law in Mississippi is unconstitutional. You have her arguing, you guys don't need to be changing anything because you've already made decisions, and we need to respect the decisions that have gone before. And what is ironic is that the Supreme Court justices who were in the minority, the three who were in the minority in that argued that for the justices who wanted to repeal Roe v. Wade, and wanted to repeal Casey, shouldn't do so because it would be succumbing to political pressure. And so now you have this weaving in of another branch of government. And I didn't want to launch right into that. And so, however way you want this to unfold, but then, like, we can talk about how there was a deviation from Black law. And then you've got this rise of case law being what governs. And then a subtle but egregious shift of the branches of government not staying in their own lane. So we can talk about that more because it really weaves into your big question about how did the Supreme Court get so far away from what they were designed to do. And political pressure arguably is the answer to your question.
Look, first of all, I'm not sure how you got my notes because that was literally the next place I wanted to go, and that was something because there's a book that I read, and I talked to you a little bit about this book. It's been a while ago though, and so the book is called Original Intent. It's by David Barton, and he kind of details a lot of what we've kind of gone through tonight, so at least some of it. And one of the things that he put out was basically that the Constitution split our three branches of government. That there was to be a balance of power. And what we have seen is the legislature, the judicial branch now kind of holds all the power. And when you start to see like some random judge, I don't know, it's not just some random judge, but when you see a judge that can overturn something that the executive branch is doing, that the president's office is doing, and say, well, that's unconstitutional. Well, that was never supposed to be how that worked. But like you said, it's been a very subtle shift, one that I don't know that most people even realize that shift has happened. And that's kind of what the point was I was making at the beginning, because we have we don't teach some of this anymore. There's not an understanding of, and I there's okay, now I'm not sure how much I want to jump into part of this and how much trouble we want to get in, but if 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 people aren't taught certain things, then they don't know certain things, and then they're completely oblivious to what's going on. And there's a reason why we see what has gone on in the education system, what has gone on, and in all of these different areas that we've talked about. Because the more that, like, Alexander, you're probably in the minority of people in this country that understand there was a shift, that here is how things were supposed to be formed and set. And then because you have so many people that didn't understand this, like, why would the executive branch ever have allowed the judicial branch to remove power from it? Well, if you don't know what power you had, then then it can be taken away from you. You're none the wiser. And I think that's kind of what we have seen, especially when, like I said, you whether it's an immigration law. Well, how does a judge come in and say, well, no, this law that is passed from the executive branch, or this order that's been done, is unconstitutional? Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I had read and understood was that all three branches are able to speak on something being constitutional or unconstitutional. It's according to their interpretation of the intent of the Constitution. One was not necessarily supposed to override the other as it pertained within their branch.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, every decision that the three branches makes is derived from, or at least should be born from, their understanding of what their role is. And they're only
Right.
going to get that from, they're supposed to only get that from the Constitution, outlining where their duties begin and end. And I think that there are a lot of these arguments also of the unelected administrative state,
Right.
those who are making laws and rules that the rest of the population has to live with, that were never elected. The process never went through the the codified democratic process of a vote. And so you've got all these unelecteds. There's separation of accountability because you've got faceless agents making decisions that you and I have to abide by. But I didn't elect you. So why are you
Right.
telling me what to do?
Right?
Right.
Like, I want a representative government. That's what my Constitution affords me
100%.
and protects me from. So there's a lot there, but I agree with you 1000%. And the shift, and you see this, I have to be so careful. So
I'm sorry, we're putting you in a rough spot here. I know.
A little bit.
it's fascinating.
Not like we're live or anything, though, so it's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. What's
Make that
interesting?
stand.
Yeah. So the Supreme Court, r- when I was writing my notes for this lesson tonight, what was the most glaring issue that probably underlies a lot of the conversation is that there was an identity crisis, where the Supreme Court, being probably the least overt of our three branches, likely along the way started to feel like it was the least respected. And so instead of seeing silence as power and being under the radar as being the sleeping giant, there seems to have been an identity crisis, such that they felt like they needed to speak with their chest about things. And unfortunately, when you don't know who you are, you start being everyone else. And I think, and this is just my opinion, but you can track where there was a season in American history where the judicial system was quiet but forceful. Because when something had to rise to the level of needing an opinion from the Supreme Court, it became a landmark decision. Like there were so many things that were defining moments at the hand of the judicial system. And for whatever reason, that power was not fully appreciated, in my opinion. And so now you have an identity crisis that leads to judicial activism, where, and you have the other branches not respecting the force of the judiciary as a branch of government. So it's both of those things, I think, where the judiciary doesn't fully appreciate maybe that even though they're the quieter arm of the government, they're still a very powerful arm. And then you've got those in the other branches of government that misunderstood that quiet for weak. And I say all that because you start to, especially in recent history, I brought two cases to share with you all that really speaks to the frustration that I have in knowing that our system of government outlines three distinct, separate, but equal branches of government. And like the first one was just 6 years ago, 7 years ago, 2019, you had the New York City. Oh, let me find it for you. New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus the City of New York. That case where the New York City ordinance said that law-abiding citizens could not carry their guns to competitions, to their second home, to a shooting range. Like they were not permitted to carry their gun, transport their gun from one place to another outside of the city limits. That was the city ordinance. And so these private gun owners bring up this case because most of the clubs within the city were primarily exclusive to membership only. So you've got, I mean, 8 million people at the time, 8 million people lived in New York City. And so now you have an ordinance that says you must wield your gun within the city, but everywhere that I would want to wield my gun has a restriction of membership only, or at least most of them have a restriction of membership only. And so these gun owners say, okay, well, we think that this ordinance is unconstitutional. So they show up to the lower level. The lower level agrees with the city of New York. They appeal. The Court of Appeals also agrees with the city of New York. So then they take this case, the Supreme Court decides to take up this case, right? So now it's at the highest court. The supreme law of the land can be decided right here. And instead of letting the process play out, what happens is you've got all these gun control advocates freaking out because they know that once the Supreme Court renders a decision, it can undo similar laws and ordinances across the nation. So instead of letting that process play out, you have these gun control advocates asking the city of New York to rewrite its ordinance. Like, be quick about this. The Supreme Court has decided to hear this matter. Go change your ordinance and go do it quickly. The city of New York does change the ordinance. And now you have the Supreme Court having to deal with an ordinance that is no longer on the books because the city changed it. And now here's the problem I have. You've got was it 4 or 5? Let me be sure. You have you have 5 senators in Congress write an amicus brief. And an amicus brief is a letter to the court written by people who are not parties to the cases that are being heard by the court, right? So it wouldn't have been a gun owner that's a part of the case. It wouldn't have been anybody representing the city of New York. This is just a general aspect of the judicial system that somebody interested in weighing in can send a letter and share their views on it. That's an amicus brief. But you've got 5 US senators sending an amicus brief, like this document, to the judiciary, threatening them that if they do not render this case or rule that this case is moot, no longer within their purview to decide on this ordinance, that they are going to um, enact legislation that will expand the number of justices on the court, and then they're going to encumber the system or confirm to the Supreme Court judicial candidates and nominees and justices ultimately who will vote and carry out their agenda
Of course.
out of the Senate,
That
a completely separate branch of government,
Blackmail.
threatening the judiciary,
that would almost seem illegal. I mean, that's just
threatening the judiciary to say,
Yeah.
hey, not only are we going to water down your
influence, but we're going to do it by expanding. And what's interesting about that is they're well within their rights to expand. But for you to send a document to the court telling them that if they don't render a certain decision, you're going to do that thing is a threat that disproportionately coming from the legislature is it's so egregious. I don't even have the words for it. It was, I mean, the Constitution says we have 3 forms of government, and you've got one trying to leverage something over another. And what's unfortunate about that case
is that even though you have 53 other senators
who write and condemn the 5 senators who wrote the amicus brief, the Supreme Court ended up rendering the decision that it was moot. So the outcome is exactly what these 5 senators asked for, and there's an erosion that happens. And you can't say for sure that it was these senators who influenced the decision of the court, but you definitely have the appearance of that having happened. And I want to leave this section or this case with a quote from one of our justices who was on the Supreme Court at that time. He said, by incorrectly dismissing this case as moot, the court permits our docket to be manipulated in a way that cannot be countenanced. If a case is on our docket and we have jurisdiction, we have an obligation to decide it. And so then he just says, our obligation is to decide cases based on the law, period. It is therefore wrong for anybody, including members of Congress, to try to influence our decisions by anything other than legal argumentation. And that that the court exercises judicial power, and Congress has no more right to interfere with that work than a justice has to interfere with legislation. Again, a clear delineation. Legislators, that's members of Congress's role and responsibility. But deciding the law, that's our purview. And
Right.
you
have encroached massive.
So can so I didn't know about that. That's
Me either.
like, to me, that should be grounds for you no longer need to be a senator. I don't care what party you're from. I don't care the circumstances surrounding it.
Yeah.
You're gonna laugh at this, but to quote the best lawyer I know, you need to stay in your lane. And in all fairness, you're the only lawyer I know, so that, but still, you would be the smartest one, no matter how many I know. But no, so it's so once again, I'm not sure how you got my notes because what you said perfectly segues into the next part of this, and all of that. So the whole issue, you know, I, how do I want to say this? I think what we have seen, the biggest thing that we see that's become evident in this shift is ideology and politics playing more of a role than it ever did before. And so one of my favorite quotes throughout history, and it's this specific quote is the reason why I love George Washington so much. At an early stage, when he was president, so John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, who at once they never were 100% aligned, but they always kind of were at odds with each other a little bit, but they were more or less aligned. And then there became, certain issues where they kind of broke off from each other. And previously, we never really had what we would say and what we would think of today as in the modern times as like political parties. Sure, we had the Whig Party, but everybody kind of was in that, and it wasn't like what we see today. And Adams and Jefferson decided they were going to split from each other and kind of build their own political party, so they were no longer aligned with one another. And George Washington said that this is the worst mistake that you will make. That as soon as we no longer be Americans, but we're aligned with a certain political party, it will erode the fabric of what we have built. And like, I don't know that I don't know that he even understood like the how prophetic kind of that statement was in a way, but also how true that statement would end up being. And what we see today is to what you just said. You have an entire city that then, because, well, we don't want to set precedent to kind of almost end the gun control argument. If the Supreme Court rules and says this is unconstitutional, you can't do this, well, then every state that's in favor of Second Amendment rights and all that kind of stuff, well, then, hey, guess what we can do now? And you really don't have an argument against it. So the political ideology has taken more of that has become more of the grounds for what we see happening. And it kind of goes to the Supreme Court. When you have, I mean, even just kind of, I'm still like baffled at what you said about the senators threatening the Supreme Court. But essentially what they were saying is, do what we say, or we're going to open this up. We're going to put in more people that are aligned politically and ideology with us. And then it no longer matters what you think and what you say, because we're going to put so many people in, we're going to pack the court to the point that you're basically voiceless now.
Yeah.
And that is dangerous. Talk about precedents being set. That's a dangerous precedent to be set.
Here we are.
But now today we see so much of you don't see
See that all the time.
like you used to see people that would speak out against their political party. That, well, this is, I go according what's right or wrong, or what my constituents have elected me to do, what they want me to do. It's not about my ideology and what the party line is. You used to see people who, I mean, let's be honest, they serve in honor and respect. And we don't see that anymore. I mean, very rarely do we see that anymore. It's, well, here's the line I have to toe, and it doesn't matter who I upset. And so I guess the question that I want to present to you, Alexandra, is like, and I know this isn't something that they're going to teach you in law school, like, but how much of and what you're taught in law school, how much of a political ideology goes into that? Like when when I'm not really sure how to ask what I'm trying to ask, because I'm trying to be careful. I don't want to put you in a bad spot either trying to answer this. But so if that happens, just tell me, hey, shut up for a second. We can't go that way. We'll be all right. But like, do you agree with? I mean, do you see that same kind of shift that we have much more of political ideology taking the forefront instead of what the law says and what the law dictates or what the Constitution says. It's more so political ideology comes first and foremost.
Um,
It's an unqualified yes.
Oh, okay.
Because it's all
unfortunate.
under interpretation.
Yeah, so
Uh, my second illustration for you, I think, will answer your question. So we talked about the rifle and pistol case. When the Dobbs case came up, this is the case that uh, that overturned Roe v. Wade and Casey. Here's the political backdrop of what was going on. You have you have in 2019 this rifle case, and you've got 53. So let me tell you this. Let me take a step back. You had 5 senators versus 53 senators. The 5 were from one political party. The 53 were all from another political party. It was not bipartisan. 5 all on one side and 53 all on the other side.
I
That's the
like what
first
you're
thing.
not saying.
you can go back and read this story and see, because it's right down party lines.
Yeah.
553. And if you know what the makeup of Congress, specifically the Senate, was in 2019, you know exactly what I'm saying. 5 and 53. 5 of them saying you'd better not even consider voting or ruling on this ordinance for New York City, and 53 of them condemning. Like, and it was all 53 on one side of the aisle
Yeah.
saying this is not a good idea. Okay, so that happens in 2019. In 2020, just a few months later, we find out that the Supreme Court has taken up the Dobbs case, which is the abortion case. And you have the Senate minority leader on the Supreme Court steps naming by name 2 of our justices and saying, and I quote, because this is egregious, I'll leave out of the quote who the 2 justices were, because I think their names are inflammatory, unfortunately, because of how political the
Yeah.
process has become. I mean, all of this points back to, we are such a divided country along political lines that what's supposed to be a simple Senate confirmation of Supreme Court justices becomes an outright circus. I mean, if you think back on the last couple, you have protest after protest after protest and disparaging comment after disparaging comment, and like accusations that are unsubstantiated, which is the most egregious, but accusations that are unsubstantiated, and the sources of those accusations should not be the characters, the people in positions that we have learned they are in. Like, it's completely disrespecting the role, the position that they're in to be a part of those conversations. It completely undermines the role. But here's what our Senate minority leader in 2020 had to say to 2 justices. I want to tell you, blank, and I want to tell you, blank. Those are the 2 names. You have released a whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions. Again, you have a member of Congress by name threatening 2 Supreme Court justices, sitting Supreme Court justices, telling them that they won't know what hit them if they render a certain decision.
Sounds like a threat to me. That's
It
just
was a threat.
Clearly,
how
clearly.
that didn't face further legal action is baffling.
How it didn't is beyond me. You will pay the price? What
That's
does that mean?
you make
And
that
to
threat
do
to
it,
somebody else, you're going to prison.
That's right.
to do it on the Supreme Court steps and to be pointing your finger at the Supreme Court while you're saying it, and then encouraging the protesters who were there with you to boo specific Supreme Court justices, this is a problem. It's egregious. And you want to talk about the political process and how you've had an erosion. I don't know that this, and this caught quite a this. I'll tell you what it is, but I want you to know that it did catch a lot of media attention, but I don't know that everyday American citizens realizes how irreversible what I'm about to tell you was. So in that same case, in the same case of Dobbs, the Roe versus Wade and Casey overturning decision, you have um, a different set of facts where um, it's kind of okay. So when that opinion was written, because the makeup of the board or the makeup of the Supreme Court was so obvious that it would be in favor of overturning Roe and overturning Casey, that you had a couple of things going on. You had the first draft of the majority opinion being circulated, as is practice, among the justices. What had never happened before was that first draft opinion being released to the public and published in a major news source.
Oh.
Never in US history had you ever had a leak that so compromised the integrity of that system, where a branch of government that has limited staff, and what I mean by limited staff is like 4 people per justice attending to them. It is a major branch of the US government, and you can count on your fingers and toes the people who have access to this opinion. And I'm exaggerating because we've got 9 Supreme Court justices, but my point being, you've got maybe 3 or 4 folks that attend to each of them. And somehow, even though they have all of these measures in place, as far as like shredding drafts so as not to even subject the possibility of opinions and notes and thought impressions getting out to the public, you have the first draft of an opinion getting released to the public to be published in a major news source. Never happened before. And it had to be the abortion case that this would get leaked out from.
Yeah.
And the onslaught. I mean, our justices couldn't even go out to dinner. Those in the majority opinion could not even go out to dinner. One of our justices had to be ushered out of the restaurant through a back door because protesters found out that he was eating there for dinner that night. And we're talking about largely unpopular people, like not unpopular, they're so obscure. Most people can't even tell you how many Supreme Court justices we have. Unfortunately, I mean that's basic civics, but they can't name them, much less tell you how many there are. And
Just which
now,
ones they've been told to hate. That's it.
That's right.
and they can't go to dinner? Like it becomes a riot at the restaurant. Like, I mean, the bomb threats, the threats on their lives. Some of them had protesters, like their home addresses were leaked for that express purpose.
Yeah.
And here's the kicker. It's not even like, here's the kicker. So you have that leak. A Supreme Court opinion only becomes an official opinion after it has been released by the Supreme Court, published by the Supreme Court. So a process of circulating an opinion and getting released is is weeks long, sometimes a couple of months, but weeks typically. Once the conference is over and the opinions, the votes have been decided, you know what the ruling's going to be, 6-3 or 5 to whatever 4, whatever that looks like. That conference has been held. The majority has been outlined. The writer of the majority opinion, the writer of the minority opinion, any concurring opinions, like all of that has been determined in the days to follow, if not at the conference. And what happens is after this leak takes place, the draft that gets leaked largely does not get edited because it was written so well by Justice Alito. It largely does not get rewritten, no major edits. And yet, every time the justices came together to grade whether it was time for that opinion to be published, this one in particular, the Dobbs case, kept getting a C. A, B, C. A, this one's ready to get published. B, this one's almost there. C, this one's not ready at all. Now, the import of what I'm telling you is the first draft was largely unedited, but you could not get the dissenting opinions. And we know that the longer this stretches out, the more opportunity a hateful individual has to take out any of the 6 and therefore rendering this opinion that got leaked ineffective. So now it begs the question, why would the 3 minority Supreme Court justices drag their feet? And for everybody who would want to say that this is conspiracy, that I'm pontificating, there's a lot of conjecture and speculation. What you don't know, or maybe you don't know, is that there were other cases that were decided that summer, and this case in particular has a reference in the dissenting opinion for a subsequent case that was not yet ready to be released. And so what happens by mechanics, you cannot release one opinion before you get to any other opinions that you're planning to release later in time. So what happens is a case that is heard later in time got published first because because this first case makes a reference to the second case. It was very intentional. It's my opinion. It's my opinion that the dissenting Supreme Court justices intentionally referenced a subsequent case because they knew it would drag out the process.
Yeah.
Knowing full well that we cannot publish this case until that case gets published. And so it ends up becoming a 3-4 month process. We're talking about up to 120 days of death threats, 120 days of people picketing my house, being ushered through the back door when I want to go out to dinner with my family, because my own colleagues don't want to get this done. And I don't know which of the staffers, or dare I say a Supreme Court justice, leaked this to the press. But now you have a problem. My suspicions are very high of the 3 that drug their feet. But because that became the talking point that these three had to be the culprits, the narrative in the public shifted. All of your talking heads started saying, oh no, this is the conservatives who are putting it out there because we don't want for them, like, we want, this is a scare tactic so that they move forward with their opinion and don't walk it back now. Like, ludicrous. It doesn't even make sense when I say it out loud. But that's what the talking heads on TV were saying. Like, oh no, this was definitely a conservative leak because they want the public outcry to be neutered by the fact that this has already been published. It's stupid, right? It sounds as stupid as their arguments are. And so, like, we talk about politics. Yeah, there's a lot of political influence. The gun case is a very clear example of that. But you've got three sitting Supreme Court justices who have made it very plain where they sit on which side of the aisle they sit and just how far they're willing to go
Yes, they have.
to potentially derail
Yeah.
a landmark decision that overturned one of the worst legislative measures we've ever seen in US history.
I appreciate that answer, by the way. And I before I say the next thing, I'm sure it was just all coincidence that all that. I knew you would laugh at that, but I'm sure it wasn't done intentionally. When you saying that some people may say it was conspiratorial, we've run into a couple of those this month, so that's okay. We don't mind those. But no, I'm glad you answered that the way that you did, because a couple things kind of come to mind in that. And one is you look at how this nation became a nation for so let me back up. Go back to the Declaration of Independence. There are 26 offenses, 27 offenses that are listed in the Declaration of Independence that they put forth as this is why we are breaking free from Britain. Because here is how King George has not represented us and treated us as he should. It wasn't so, and I think that's one thing that's misrepresented is why we broke free. But even with that being said, you look at how everything happened for the better part of a few years, 3 or 4 or 5 years. I mean, we had a First Continental Congress well before we went to war with Britain. And in all fairness, war was never the goal. War was never even really something that was entertained until there was no other option. And even at that point, it was still, we do not want to go to war with Great Britain. And on some hand, it may have been because we're not sure that we can beat Great Britain in open warfare. But the other part of it was we want to do this in a respectful way, that we will put petitions forth to the king. We will put petitions forth. We will bring these, we will submit our cases. And what happened when they did that? Things just got worse. But then you even have when the first shots are fired at Lexington and Concord in 1775, it wasn't an all-out act of war. It was British soldiers going to take over an armory in that area, and a militia group stood their ground, would not move. They were open fire, or they were fired upon, returned fire. Then you have war, because there was kind of no other way to avoid it at that point. But you see the way in which we responded to things then. We will seek out every avenue that is available to us before we seek violence. And what is it that you see today? Well, now instead of, we still had respect. There were still people in Congress who, did they despise King George? 100%. Would they in public speak ill of him? No, because you were to have respect for even those that you detested and were political opponents to. You look at how we used to do things in the political arena in this country. We've had plenty of people who could not have been more different from each other than they were, that were running for office together. And in public, I mean, I remember seeing I think it was John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, who pretty much hated each other. And they were asked to say something nice about the other one, or what do you appreciate about, and they actually came up with legitimate answers as to there was not this vitriol that we see today. And so, to go to your point, when you have Supreme Court is not an area that you would expect to see something like this, where we're just going to drag our feet, and we're not going. Political ideology is not supposed to have any effect on how a Supreme Court judge makes their decision. It is, here is what the law states. The law is very clear in this matter. There's no gray area. It's black or white. Here's not well, my political leanings are this, so that should have no effect on it. But now, because of the way the political arena kind of tends to be, it's not really separated from anything. And so every decision that we make is influenced by political ideology. And that's a shame. I mean, it is. So there's a quote that I wanted to read. And so this actually comes from 1799, and it's Jedediah Morse. And he was a pastor. And he says, our dangers are of two kinds, those which affect our religion and those which affect our government. They are, however, so closely allied that they cannot, with propriety, be separated. The foundations which support Christianity are also necessary to support a free and equal government like our own. Whenever the pillars of Christianity shall be overthrown, our present republican forms of government and all the blessings which flow from them must fall with them. That hurt me to read when I first found that, because that's what we see. And and all of this, and I didn't really think about this until this moment, but the part of this that is so disheartening is, as the pillars of Christianity, as the church has lessened in this country, then you start to see the shifts that we have in education, that we have in our legal system, that we have in all of these other areas within the American foundation. I mean, all of our American forms of government, all of what America is. Well, the more that we stop standing up for what the Word of God says, and we started compromising, then we start to see the erosion of who we are as a nation. And it's the exact same thing that you see with the nation of Israel. In the Old Testament, as soon as God no longer was God, as soon as he was no longer the first and the foremost, you start to see the erosion of who Israel was and who they were created to be. And nothing will ever, unless God shows me otherwise, nothing will ever convince me otherwise of this. God had his hand on this nation when it was founded. This nation was created with God's blessing. God was to be at the forefront of everything that we did. His word was to be the inspiration for all that we did. And unfortunately, very early on in this nation's infancy, we started to compromise in our faith. I'm going to leave that there. I'm not going to go any further into that.
No better than the Israelites.
Yeah. I do have one final quote, and this one will kind of lighten the mood up a little bit. So this quote comes from Ronald Reagan. It was when he was the governor of California. He said this in 1974, and it's with reference to the Ten Commandments. He said, if a bureaucrat had written the Ten Commandments, a simple rock slab would not have been near enough room. Those simple rules would have read, thou shalt not, unless you feel strongly to the contrary, or for the following stated exceptions, see paragraphs 1 through 10, subsection A. I read that, and I'm sitting in my office at UNF, and it was all I could do to not just bust out laughing. That's the most Ronald Reagan quote I could ever imagine. But there is truth in that. And from everything that we've discussed tonight, I think you can see exactly what he meant by that. Is the more that we allow our politicians to not stand on the basics, the basis and the foundations of what this nation is and what their position. I mean, I'm still, Alexandra, you have completely I don't even know the words to use. My head is messed up from hearing so, I mean, how you have the threats that happen I mean, how you have this and there's no legal recourse for senators to threaten, like, you're going to do this or, face the consequences. And then you have Senate minority leader stand on the steps and threaten by name specific Supreme Court justices. And I mean, so then what happens if one of them, some crazy person hears those words, goes out and assassinates them? What's the legal recourse then? Because I'm going to leave that one alone because that's a different discussion and that creates other issues for more.
And
Yeah,
God
no, I'm going to leave
forbid
that.
that were to happen. I mean, you cross
Yeah.
you cross a line that again can never be taken back when it goes if it were to ever get that far. And I appreciate you sharing this, and I all week I've been thinking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and one of the questions that just jumped out at me as we're talking about leadership and um, the overarching frustration is that people have abused their positions and have blurred the lines. And
Yep.
one of the things that stood out to me as I was reading the story out of Daniel um, is that King Nebuchadnezzar, I pulled this up, Daniel chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar in verse 2 sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and lawyers. We've talked about three of those. Three of those. I mean, it's all three branches have been called to the carpet
Yep.
by King Nebuchadnezzar. Again, you've got satraps and prefects and governors. You've got counselors, the treasurers, and the judges. You've got magistrates and lawyers and the officials of the provinces being assembled by King Nebuchadnezzar. Why? To look at with admiration the gold plated image, the gold plated image. And they are who he summons to worship. The leadership of his provinces are who are called to worship. Why? So that they can stay in good graces with him, right? And you've got these three Hebrew boys who had been elevated to a position of leadership. And they say, not only do they say that they don't have to answer him to give him an answer on that point, but they say, if it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to rescue us from the furnace of of blazing fire, and he will rescue us from your hand, O King. That kind of courage is what has been noticeably absent.
Amen.
These are boys who knew, and I call them boys on purpose. They were teenagers when they were promoted because of how I think Daniel chapter 1 talks about them being head and shoulders above their peers in their unusual aptitude for learning all literature and wisdom. Like they have a distinction about them and they rise to the top, but they never compromised who they were. And I'm going to close the loop with where we started. President Eisenhower added under God to our Pledge of Allegiance. But what's unfortunate about his story is that political advancement is why he appointed the two most progressive justices we ever saw. political advancement, his own political
Compromise.
advancement. Yes, that kind of compromise is what brought on the progressive activist judicial court system that they ushered that in. The Burger Warren court is notorious. Like if ever anybody listening who goes to law school, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The Burger Warren court, Chief Justice Burger and then Chief Justice Warren. One came before the other, or one came after and took the position of the other. But it was judicial activism like we had never seen before, where they were reaching into other of the branches of government and giving themselves power that they didn't have. So you have a president who did not do what these three boys did and just said, you know what? I'm just going to leave it in God's hands. Whatever, like, power isn't going to entice me. The lust of influence is not going to entice me. I'm going to do what's right. And instead,
That's going.
Political advancement says, hey, like, I need to keep moving forward. I need to keep checking the boxes that I'm looking to check. So let's appoint you two to the Supreme Court. And it was disastrous for us to that end.
So
I
I'm
know
not
we're
sure.
well over, but I felt like that was a good,
that was very good.
important to share.
So it's kind of funny. I didn't have this one in my notes, so I'm really not sure how you got it. But you just answered the question that I was going to close with, and that was what do we do? Like, what is our job? And you just answered it. We've got to quit compromising. We've got to be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and we've got to say, I'm going to stand on the word of God, and I'm not going to compromise from it. And now my God is able to save me. But even if he doesn't, I will not waver on his word. I will not waver on his statutes, and I will obey the commands of God until my last breath. It's been a while since I've cried on a Thursday night Bible study, but you brought me to tears tonight.
That's
that,
good.
Thank you for that. We're gonna start a separate Bible study, and it's just you teaching us like legal stuff, Alexandra. It's not often that I get to sit on here and just it honestly, it felt like I was back in college, like just sitting listening to and I mean that in the best possible way that can be said. I enjoy every part of what you shared tonight. I greatly appreciate and enjoy. All of this was there's a reason I had you on, and you exceeded every thought I had about what we were going to do tonight. So tonight was fantastic.
Thank you for having me. You guys do a phenomenal job. I can't say enough how again, you're a part of making Morningstar so great, and this platform, you cannot say enough words about it. I appreciate everything that you guys do every Thursday night to bring the word to those who can't be in the building on a Wednesday or can't be in the building on a Sunday morning for Sunday school. Like, you guys are carrying a load, and it's not easy. And it really should not be understated. And so I thank you. Thank you for letting me be a part of the team tonight. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it and appreciate you
So
guys.
glad to have you.
Thank you for having
It
me.
won't be as long
Next
until
time.
we have you on the next time.
This time next year, I'll see you guys.
No. We gotta bump that time up just a little bit. We're gonna have part 2 of, we're just gonna get on and talk the law with Alexandra tonight. Just
So do you remember, David, do you remember when we did this last year? The one word that I kept saying kept coming up over and over and over. It's the same word. There you go.
Yep.
Compromise. And
It changes lots of things.
it changes everything. It blurs everything. And when people say it, they say it as if it's a good thing.
Yep. Oh, we're good. This is
It's why we're where we are, unfortunately.
Yeah. This is going to be what.
Same
So
thing.
next week, Miss Sylvia Granny is going to be on, and we're basically going to talk about the last handful of decades in this nation's history, and where we have seen such a drastic shift. And yeah, so I think each week in this series, one just kind of perfectly sets up the next one, and you have perfectly set the stage for what we're going to talk about next week. That one's going to be interesting. But all right, Sammy, we have.
Yep,
We've
great prayer. This has been fascinating and frustrating, irritating. Sometimes you got to put that mute button on there because you're like, you just, I mean, seriously, you get so disgusted
Yeah.
with what has been allowed through compromise to happen. And here's where we find ourselves. And it's compromise in every area. Excuse me, could you leave, please? It's compromise in every area. So, but this is absolutely amazing this evening.
Hey, my phone's about to die, so if for whatever reason I black out, it's not because I'm not like I don't have a charger, so I'm sorry. I
That's
wasn't
okay.
like I was doing pretty well, but you know these Zoom communications bleed the battery.
Yes,
Yeah.
they do.
No, you're
No.
okay.
If you're ready.
Sammy, go ahead.
Okay. All right.
You're up.
I go Elohe Mishpat, God of justice/law. Your righteousness, O God, reaches to the heavens. You who have done great things, O God, who is like you? Save us from violence, discord, and confusion, from pride and arrogance, and from every evil way. Defend our liberties and fashion into one united people. Endow with thy spirit of wisdom those whom in thy name we entrust the authority of government, that there may be justice and peace at home. It's a portion from Thomas Jefferson's prayer. Teach America, O Lord, the way of your statutes, and we shall keep it to the end. Give us understanding, and we shall keep your law. Indeed, we shall observe it with our whole hearts. Make our states courageous as we walk in the path of your commandments, for we delight in them. O beautiful America, for the spacious skies and amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesty, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. In the majestic name of Jesus, amen. We love you, Lord.
Amen.
Thank you, Sam.
Great.
You know you have
You're
to send us that
welcome.
one
I may have gotten tears
Okay.
from that one.
too.
I
No,
think we're just so proud of America. It doesn't matter what's going on in our country. This place is, we know it's one of the best places you could ever choose to live. And we are so blessed to be born here and to stand up for it.
Yes. Stop compromising.
So Alexandra, I don't know if you are aware of this, but the first night, Sammy told me she had a prayer for us when whenever we wanted her to read it and everything. And everybody that was on the first night was like, all right, as soon as you turn that camera off, we're gonna sit and cry because the prayer was just. And so I told her, like, okay, you got to send that one through. And then she has made one for each night, and each one has perfectly tied in with what we have talked, even though she did not know exactly, what we're going to talk about and everything. She went off. I'll tell her. No, but Sammy, thank you so much. The prayer. I don't even have words for tonight. Tonight was fantastic.
It was. It was.
You'll say it was the best one.
I do. Yeah, they all are. Yeah,
They are, but I mean, they all are in a different way as well. But man,
this one was good because it was less of me talking. But
I don't know.
You did good.
It literally is just so fascinating.
I didn't do that.
Wow, that's weird. My camera did that on its very own. Wow. But anyway, yes, absolutely. What a weird thing to do.
well, I thank you all for being again. Special thank you to Alexandra.
Yeah, so amazing.
So much knowledge shared tonight. It was fantastic. And like I said, next week Miss Sylvia will be on. That one. That's gonna. What better way to wrap it up than to have Miss Sylvia on. You know, we're going to get into an argument or something with her coming on, so that'll be fun.
Fun one. Just
Um,
a fun one.
but I mean,
I'll be quiet.
No. How fun would that be? No.
but again, thank you all so much. I'm looking forward to next week. Yeah, we'll see what the Lord has in store for us. But I hope everybody. My brain is not working yet. It's just, I think part of it ended up in here in the security room at the church. She blew my mind with some of the stuff she was saying. But
I believe I will watch it again.
yeah, I don't usually go back and watch them, but this one I might have to go back.
Yeah, I will
No,
watch
but
it.
again, thank you all so much. I hope you have a great night, great weekend. Yeah, may the Lord bless you and keep you. God bless you. Love you. Good night.
Amen.
Lots
Good
of
night.
peace. Good night.